Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take, well, sometimes stacks of complex sources and really try to boil them down to the clearest, most essential knowledge just for you. Today, we're setting out on a, let's say, meticulous philosophical journey. We're going deep into the very architecture of divine love, which is known as Bhakti. Our sources for this are pretty foundational texts in the devotional tradition. We're specifically drawing from the insights in Dlainra Code Sathwe, Kalea, Sanfo Iagoba, Sriya Abase, and we're also bringing in the rigorous theological frameworks developed by the religious studies arm of Energy and Personal Excellence, LLC. Now, this particular deep dive, it was specifically requested by Sachin J. Karnik. He's the founder and CEO of Energy and Personal Excellence, LLC. And he asked for this detailed exploration, really, to clarify the systematic approach to devotion you find in these scriptures.
Right. So our mission today, it's really to move beyond just a surface reading of these ancient texts. We want to penetrate the systematic, almost scholastic theology that's provided by authorities like, well, Rupa Goswami and the Bhagavata Purana itself. We're basically trying to chart the blueprint of devotion. What is it and how is it distinct, really distinct from other spiritual paths? And the goal isn't just head knowledge, not just jhana. It's about understanding the rasa, that inherent aesthetic taste, the flavor, if you will, of pure devotion.
That makes sense. And before we really jump in, maybe we should mention it for anyone listening who finds this kind of systematic, rigorous devotional study inspiring. Well, Sachin J. Karnik actually conducts a daily online satsang. It's dedicated to these very topics we're discussing today. So if this resonates with you, the invitation is there. All are welcome to join.
Yeah, that's important context, I think. Because what we're talking about here, it's not just, vague faith or some kind of emotional belief system. It's actually a highly sophisticated, very organized worldview. And it offers a very distinct path to the absolute.
Okay, let's start right at the center then, the core term, Bhakti. The texts, especially Rupa Goswami's analysis, they give a definition that's, well, it seems simple on the surface, but it's also completely uncompromising, isn't it? It seems to immediately separate Bhakti from pretty much every other spiritual goal out there.
That's exactly right. The core identity, the essence of Bhakti, is defined as dedicated service. Service to Kusa, or Hatisha, the Lord of the senses. But and this is the key, that service, the seva, it has to be qualified by two really specific attributes. These elevate it to what they call pure devotion.
Okay, attribute one. This is the one that feels maybe the most challenging for the human mind, I think. The idea of service without motive.
Absolutely. It's huge. The service must be rendered pleasantly, yes, but also devoid of desire for anything else. And this is radical,
Yeah.
because it excludes all forms of self-interest. Doesn't matter if you want material wealth or a good reputation or even just a comfortable retirement or even happiness in the next life. If your motivation for serving God is ultimately about getting something for yourself,
Then it's not pure bhakti.
by definition, no. It falls short. It might be pious, it might be religious activity, but it's not pure, unalloyed devotion.
So wait, even if I perform service hoping for a spiritual reward, like, say, getting into the spiritual world eventually, does that still taint the purity?
According to this framework, yes, it does. It shifts the whole dynamic, doesn't it? It moves from unconditional love towards something more like a transaction. I do this for you, so you give me that. The logic here, and it's rooted in the very nature of love itself, whether we're talking mundane or divine, is that true love means the goal is simply the pleasure of the beloved. Full stop. The seva, the service, it's done only for the gratification of the divine. Not for my gratification, not for my gain. When that selflessness is really there, then the service becomes Utte Supreme.
Okay, that clarifies the first point incredibly well. Which brings us right to the second non-negotiable attribute. This service, it must be unobstructed. And here, the texts seem to specifically target two major traditional paths as potential, obstructions. Jhana, intellectual knowledge, and karma action or ritual.
Yes, and this is a massive philosophical distinction they're drawing. The tradition is actually claiming that preoccupation with these other established paths, the path of works, karma, or the path of knowledge, jhana, can actually hinder pure devotion.
Hold on, that seems counterintuitive. Isn't deep intellectual understanding jhana, especially understanding Vedanta, sort of necessary? Doesn't it help you avoid just, falling into emotionalism or fanaticism? How does this theology square that? How does it reconcile intellectual rigor with the profound humility it also demands?
That's an excellent point, and it really gets to a central tension here. The concern isn't with knowledge itself, not at all. Knowledge is valued. The issue is the potential byproduct of intellectual pursuit, when it becomes divorced from, or even superior to, devotion. The texts warn very specifically about something called buddhi ahora.
Okay, what's that?
It's the pride of intellect, the pride of being a brilliant scholar, the pride of knowing Brahman, the sort of intellectual arrogance that the ego can latch onto. This kind of pride, they say, it just clutters up the heart. It makes that required posture of profound humility and selfless service basically impossible. Because pure love needs vulnerability, doesn't it? It needs surrender. And intellectual arrogance fights that tooth and nail.
Ah, okay. So jhana is valuable, maybe like a map to understand the territory of the divine. But it becomes disastrous if the mapmaker starts thinking they're more important than the territory itself, if it becomes a pedestal.
Precisely. That's a great way to put it. Knowledge must serve bhakti, not obstruct it. And furthermore, the very nature of the practice itself, bhakti practice, rejects the classical methodology you find in systems like Patanjali's yoga. Patanjali's system requires nirodha.
Right, the cessation or stilling of the mind and the senses.
Yes, calming everything down, withdrawing inwards.
And Bhakti says, no, hang on, don't stop the senses. Redirect them.
Is that the... Exactly. Why shut down your senses if, according to this view, they ultimately belong to God, the Lord of the senses, Kutesha? Instead, the entire being, body, mind, senses, everything is utilized in seva, in active, dynamic service to the divine. You use your voice. You use it for chanting the holy names, kirtan. Your ears, for listening to the stories of the Lord, Shiravan. Your mind, for constant remembrance, smarasham. Your hands, for worship, for cooking, for cleaning the temple. Everything gets repurposed, you see. Offered back to the source, the possessor of all energy, the Saktiman. It's a full-bodied, full-minded engagement, not a spiritual shutdown.
Okay, that distinction is crystal clear now. So if the very definition of bhakti is this selfless, unobstructed service, then logically the goals of the devotional path must also be radically different from other traditional spiritual goals.
Let's really dive into that philosophical crossroads. The path of devotion versus the path of knowledge, jhana, which usually aims for mukha, liberation. Yes, this is arguably the most critical distinction we need to unpack today, because the ultimate goal of classical yoga, and also non-dual Vedanta, Advaita, is generally understood as mukha, liberation. Often this is defined as achieving samadhi, that state of abiding in one's own true nature, the Atman.
Svarupa avastam.
Exactly. And this state is described as, well, a realization of static, infinite, eternal, blissful being. Saksidananda, pure existence, consciousness, bliss. And it's important to note, even in Patanjali's system, where you find Evara Prachidana, surrender to Aishvara, the personal God.
Right, that's one of the niyamas.
Yes. But even there, that surrender is generally interpreted as a highly efficient tool, a technique, to help you attain that static self-realization, that samadhi. It's not usually seen as an end goal of having an eternal relationship with Aishvara.
Okay, so the jhani, the follower of the path of knowledge, is seeking to eliminate suffering by realizing their perfect, self-sufficient spiritual identity. The goal is self-realization, abiding in the self.
Correct. Now, contrast that sharply with the devotional path. Bhakti doesn't just dismiss ordinary material desires. It also rejects moksha, liberation itself, as the ultimate aim.
And that's where we get that famous and, honestly, pretty provocative claim that moksha is considered worthless.
It's stated very explicitly. In the Bhagavata Purana tradition, moksha is frequently compared to straw. Just insignificant chaff. It's a common literary trope, basically, to express something that has absolutely no value whatsoever when you compare it to the alternative being offered. And that alternative is the constant, ever-increasing dynamic bliss of divine love, prima.
Okay, but why? Why would achieving a blissful eternal self-state where all suffering is gone forever, why would that be considered inferior? That seems to fly in the face of almost every other spiritual tradition, doesn't it?
It does seem counterintuitive at first glance. The answer, according to this theology, lies in the fundamental difference between achieving a perfect state versus engaging in a perfect relationship. Moksha, as generally conceived, leads to a static, blissful self-state. It's perfect, yes, but it's unchanging. It's the joy of being fully realized, essentially, alone in one's own perfection. Bhakti, on the other hand, offers something entirely different, an eternal, dynamic, and ever-expanding relationship with the personal God. If you accept that Kautna is infinite, then the relationship with him must also be infinitely diverse, infinitely unfolding, infinitely expanding. There's always more. So the bliss derived from prema, from pure love, is relational, it's dynamic, it's selfless, whereas the bliss of moksha, from this perspective, is seen as ultimately self-centered, focused on one's own state and complete static. The devotee, therefore, isn't content with just abiding peacefully in their own Atman. They want the ongoing reciprocal joy of giving and receiving love in an eternal relationship with the source of all bliss.
Ah, I see. That's the core difference then. Relationship implies movement, interaction, continuous growth, maybe even drama in a transcendental sense, whereas static self-realization is an endpoint, a final state of rest. And this difference is considered so fundamental that the tradition says true devotees reject all 5 of the traditional types of liberation, or moksha.
Yes, they reject them entirely. The texts describe scenarios where the Lord himself offers these forms of liberation, and the pure devotee politely declines.
Declines liberation. Why?
Because accepting any form of liberation that prioritizes one's own state over the relationship would interrupt the constant spontaneous flow of service, seva, and relationship, rasa. And that service, that relationship, is the devotee's only goal, their only desire.
Okay, let's break down these 5 categories of liberation then. What are they, and what's the specific objection to each from this Bhakti viewpoint?
Right. The 5 types are systematically addressed in the commentaries. First, there's Salakya. This is the desire for co-residence, basically wanting to live in the same spiritual realm, like Vaikutha as the Lord.
Okay, wanting to be in the same place.
Second, Sadant. This is the desire for equality in power or opulence. The liberated soul might gain abilities or splendors similar to the Lord's.
Getting similar powers. Got it.
Third, Samipya. This is the desire for proximity, just wanting to be physically close to the Lord, in his presence.
Gunenes.
Fourth, Sarupya. This is the desire for similarity in form. The liberated soul might manifest a spiritual body that looks similar to Vit, perhaps with 4 arms, for example.
Having a similar appearance.
And fifth, the most controversial one, is Samudja. This is the desire for complete union, or merging entirely into the impersonal aspect of the absolute, the Brahman effulgence.
Okay, merging. And it seems like the ultimate, absolute, non-negotiable rejection is reserved for Sayuja. Why is merging considered completely unacceptable here?
Sayuja is totally rejected because the very foundation of bhakti is service, seva. And service inherently requires duality, doesn't it? You need a relationship between 2 distinct entities, the server and the one being served. If the individual soul, jiva, merges entirely into the impersonal Brahman, then individuality is lost, poof, gone. And if individuality is gone, the possibility of a dynamic relationship of eternal loving service vanishes completely.
So merging is seen as the absolute cessation of relational love.
Exactly. It's the end of the relationship. This is why the personalist Gachiya Vedanta position strongly insists that the impersonal Brahman, which is often the goal for jhanis, is actually nothing more than the dazzling spiritual effulgence, the light, emanating from the personal body of God Kian.
Ah, okay. So the jhani might aim for the brilliance, the light, while the bhakta, the devotee, aims for the source of the light, the person casting the light.
That's a perfect summary. They want the relationship with the source itself. Now, interestingly, regarding the other 4 forms of liberation, Salakya, same place, Saro, same power, Samipya, nearness, and Sarupya, same form, the stance is slightly different. They are considered acceptable, but only under one very strict condition.
And what's that condition?
The condition is that achieving these states must primarily facilitate or enhance the devotee's service. The motivation cannot be personal happiness, personal power, or personal status. So, if living in the same realm as God, Salokya, helps me increase my capacity to serve him better, fine, I'll accept it. If achieving a similar form, Sarupya, allows me to be a more effective attendant in some specific pastime, okay, that's acceptable. But if the primary motive for seeking any of these 4 liberations is my own pride, or my own desire for my happiness to be complete, or my status to be elevated, then they are rejected just like Sayuja. The driving force, the filter, must always be selfless service. That is the absolute litmus test for pure bhakti.
Wow, okay. So the entire theological structure really stands or falls on this idea. The absolute supremacy of the dynamic, eternal, selfless relationship over any kind of static, blissful self-realization, however perfect it might seem. Now, this systematic rejection of merging and the insistence on eternal individuality for the sake of service, it must require a very specific metaphysical framework to support it, right? If the soul has to remain individual forever to serve, we need to understand the structure of reality that makes this eternal individuality and this dynamic relationship possible, which I guess brings us to the foundational metaphysics underpinning this school, the Gachiya Vedanta.
Exactly. We need the philosophical scaffolding now. And this was largely defined and elaborated by theologians like Jiva Goswami in the centuries after Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. The absolute core tenet is something called Sakti Saktiman Abheda. This translates roughly to the essential non-difference Abheda between the possessor of energy, Shaktiman, and his energy, Shakti. Ayya is understood as the Saktiman, the supreme possessor of all energies, infinite energies.
Okay, and he possesses everything, and is the source of all energy, then the reality that results from that can't be static or inert, can it?
No, not at all. Reality is viewed as a living, pulsating, dynamic continuum of divine consciousness. Count is simultaneously transcendent. He's the ultimate source, beyond everything, and also immanent. He's present within everything as the very texture of reality. This complex relationship is captured in their central metaphysical doctrine, Asintya Pidapatartva.
Okay, break that down for us. Asintya Bhadabhatattva.
Asintya means inconceivable. Bheda means difference. Apeda means non-difference or oneness. Tattva means truth or principle. So it's the truth of inconceivable, simultaneous oneness and difference.
Inconceivable, simultaneous oneness and difference. That sounds like a paradox. How are we supposed to grasp that?
Well, inconceivable means it can't be fully grasped by the limited material mind or logic, but we can use analogies to get a sense of it. The classic one is the sun and the sunshine. The sun is the Saktiman, the possessor of energy. The sunshine, the heat and light, that's his energy, his Sakti. Now, are the sun and the sunshine the same? Well, yes, in essence, they share the same nature, heat, and light. But are they different? Absolutely. You can stand here on Earth in the sunshine without being consumed by the fiery ball of the sun itself. The sun remains in its place, distinct, while its energy permeates everything. So this analogy helps illustrate the concept. The absolute, Kinta, is simultaneously one with his manifestations, his energy, in terms of essential nature, yet he also remains distinct and different as the source.
Okay, and this paradoxical concept is crucial, isn't it? Because it allows the universe and individual souls to be seen as manifestations of God's energy, yet simultaneously distinct enough for the soul to maintain its individuality forever and have a real relationship with God.
Precisely. The whole of existence, from this viewpoint, is a dynamic unity. All the multiplicity we see, the countless forms, the infinite universes, the different levels of consciousness, it's all simply an expression of the inexhaustible, playful, creative potency of the divine. And significantly, the material world isn't viewed as just an illusion, Maya in the Advaita sense, that needs to be completely negated or escaped from. Rather, it's seen as a sacred revelation, a temporary but real manifestation of the divine's energy, part of his cosmic rhythm of expansion and contraction. It has a purpose within the larger divine play.
This philosophy also seems to place a strong emphasis on the idea that if the Supreme Being is truly perfect, he must also possess perfect form, perfect beauty. It directly addresses the question of whether God is formless or has form.
Yes, absolutely. The argument goes, if perfection is the nature of the absolute, then that perfection must include the perfection of form, the perfection of beauty. He must be omni-beautiful. So, God's form is not considered material. It's not made of the temporary elements, gutes, that make up our physical bodies. Instead, his divine form is composed entirely of Saksidananda, eternity, Saksikt, knowledge or consciousness, and bliss. His body is essentially made of condensed consciousness and bliss. This means there's no difference, unlike in our material bodies, between God's inside, his internal awareness, his feelings, and his outside, his bodily manifestation. It's all one seamless reality of eternal youth, completeness, and overwhelming beauty.
Okay, so we have the Siktiman, the energetic source, Katak, with his Saksatanda form. Now, to map out how this supreme energetic source interacts with everything else, with creation, the theology divides his energy, his Sikti, into three primary functional categories or divisions. This seems to give us the essential map of spiritual existence, material existence, and where we fit in.
That's exactly what it does. These three divisions clarify the ontological status, the nature of being, of everything, the eternal spiritual realm, the temporary material realm, and crucially the individual soul, which is positioned, in a sense, between them.
All right, let's start with the source of the spiritual world itself. That would be the Svarupa Shakti.
The Svarupa Shakti is the internal energy, or the intrinsic potency. This is described as the ontic plenitude, meaning the absolute fullness, the self-sufficient reality of God's own intrinsic being. It is the spiritual substance itself. This energy forms the very substratum, the foundation of the eternal spiritual world, which is called Vaikutha, or sometimes Paravyoma. This is the realm where Kitsa performs his endless, blissful, transcendental activities or pastimes.
And within this internal energy, the Svarupa Shakti, the texts identify three sort of fundamental modalities or functions through which it operates.
Yes, these three are inherent aspects of God's spiritual existence, the building blocks of that spiritual reality. First is Santini. This is the power of existence, the existential potency. It's the principle that upholds and sustains the very reality of the spiritual world, and fundamentally, it also sustains our own eternal existence as spiritual beings, as souls.
Okay, existence itself.
Second is savet. This is the power of knowledge, or the cognitive potency. It provides pure, unconditioned consciousness and knowledge, completely free from the ignorance and misidentification that characterize the material world.
Pure consciousness.
And third is ladina. This is the power of bliss, the potency of pure spiritual pleasure or effect. This is the source of all divine love, all spiritual ecstasy. It's the energy that actually drives and nourishes the dynamic, loving relationships of Bhakti.
Wow. Okay, so that's Swarupa Shakti. Sounds like the ultimate reality the devotee is aspiring to connect with, a realm literally made of pure existence, pure consciousness, and pure bliss. Now we have to contrast that with the world we currently perceive, the realm of temporary existence, limited knowledge, and often suffering. How does the theology explain the creation of this world using the energy model?
That is the function of the second major division, the Maya Shakti, the external energy. It's often described in rather stark terms like a dimensional inversion of consciousness. Now, it's crucial to understand, Maya is still God's energy. It's not some independent evil force, but its function is different. It projects reality into the framework of space, time, and materiality. And it operates primarily through obscuration, through creating avidya or ignorance. It covers the soul's true knowledge.
So Maya doesn't create something unreal or non-existent, but rather it creates limitation, covering, and concealment of the spiritual reality.
Precisely. Within the domain governed by Maya Shakti, the individual consciousness mistakenly identifies with matter prakriti. This misidentification leads directly to the generation of the false ego, the sense of being a separate material enjoyer, ahakara. And from that false ego inevitably arises suffering, in its various forms: birth, death, old age, disease, anxiety, and so on. It's like an illusory veil maintained by God himself, paradoxically, to allow the individual soul the experience of apparent autonomy and separation, which generates the possibility of forgetting him and trying to enjoy independently.
Okay, that covers the spiritual realm, Swarupa Shakti, and the material realm, Maya Shakti. So finally, where do we, the individual souls, the jivas, fit into this grand map of divine energies?
That is the role and nature of the third division, the Tasta Shakti, the marginal energy. This energy is the individual souls, the Jiva Caitanya units of consciousness. The word Tasta literally means situated on the bank or on the shore or on the border.
The shoreline analogy.
Exactly. It signifies that the soul exists in what the theologians call a metastable ontological state. It's inherently spiritual, like the Swarupa Shakti, but it has the unique capability of being influenced by or polarized towards either the spiritual plane or the material plane.
So like standing on the bank of a river.
That's the classic analogy. Imagine a river flowing. On one side, you have the solid, eternal spiritual ground, representing Swarupa Shakti. On the other side, you have the unstable, temporary, sometimes flooded material land, representing Maya Shakti. The soul, the jiva, is standing right there on the bank, the taya. It possesses a kind of energetic neutrality in its constitutional position. Importantly, it retains its distinct individuality forever, meaning each soul is eternally distinguishable from the total consciousness field, paramatmata, and from other souls. But crucially, it has the capacity for free will, a tiny spark of independence, which manifests as the choice of which energy field to align with, which direction to look, which reality to embrace.
So our entire spiritual journey, then, from this perspective, is essentially an active conscious choice. We use our marginal position and free will to choose to align our consciousness with the Swarupa Shakti, primarily through the process of bhakti devotion. And by doing so, we effectively pull ourselves off that unstable riverbank and firmly onto the secure ground of the spiritual realm.
That's the entire project in a nutshell. We are constitutionally marginal energy, and our ultimate destination, our eternal happiness or suffering, depends entirely on where we choose to polarize our consciousness, towards Kyun or towards Maya.
Okay, that metaphysical framework is incredibly helpful for understanding the why behind the practices. So let's move into the actual journey of the devotee. Once someone starts these structured practices, the path from being a beginner to becoming a perfected soul involves experiencing certain internal milestones. The texts talk about two key stages: the dawning of real spiritual affection, called bhava, and then the full maturation of that into pure love, prema.
Yes, bhava is understood as the preliminary stage, the first blossoming of prema. Rupa Goswami defines it very precisely as an emotional state that begins to manifest spontaneously within the mind, signaling that pure love, prema, is starting to take root. It's like the first light of dawn before the sun fully rises.
And this stage, bhava, is often described as a kind of bridge, isn't it? It connects the disciplined, sometimes effortful practice of the beginner,
Yeah.
sadhana, with the spontaneous, natural, ecstatic state of the advanced devotee. But the texts are also very clear. Bhava isn't something you can achieve just through your own effort, your own willpower alone.
No, absolutely not. And this is another point where Bhakti radically differs from, say, classical yoga. While yoga emphasizes self-effort, intense willpower, and essentially beating the mind into submission, nirodha, Bhava is described explicitly as a gift from God, from Bhagavan. Now, it can be earned, in a sense, through very diligent, sincere, and continuous dedication to the preparatory practices, sadhana bhakti, that's the usual path. But the texts also say that for the exceptionally fortunate, bhava can be received purely by the causeless mercy, the grace Kappa himself, or perhaps even more commonly, through the grace of Kutsa's pure devotees, bhaktas.
This emphasis on grace really underlines the idea that love ultimately can't be forced or demanded, can it? It has to be given, it has to be bestowed, which makes the role of the guru and association with advanced devotees absolutely essential.
Exactly. They act as the conduits for that grace. Now, when this bhava is actually received, either through practice or grace, something remarkable happens internally. The mind, which is currently conditioned and wired for the, let's say, low voltage energy of the material world, Maya, suddenly starts to receive a current of high voltage spiritual energy originating from the Halini Shakti, the bliss potency. And the physical body, the material vehicle, isn't really designed for that level of energy. So it responds to this sudden internal shift with very specific, observable, external physiological indicators. These are known as the sathika bhavas.
Okay, what are these external symptoms then? The signs that signal the arrival of genuine, deep spiritual emotion?
These are generally understood as involuntary physical reactions. The body is basically overwhelmed by an internal reality it wasn't built to handle smoothly. The texts list 8 primary ones, but some common examples include 1. Tears. Spontaneous tears filling the eyes, often flowing uncontrollably, not necessarily from sadness, but from overwhelming spiritual emotion. 2. Goosebumps, bristling hair. This is known technically as pulaka or romanika, often translated as hair relation. The hairs on the body literally stand on end in waves of ecstasy. This is a very common and powerful experience people report during, say, a particularly sweet and intense congregational chant, a kirtan. 3. Voice faltering, choking, the voice becoming choked or faltering, gadgada, due to the sheer intensity of the emotion, making it difficult to speak clearly or continue chanting coherently.
Wow. So it sounds like an experience of overwhelming joy mixed perhaps with a kind of spiritual pain, almost like the material system is being short-circuited by something too powerful for it.
That's actually a very good way to describe it. The material body is reacting, sometimes quite dramatically, to its first real contact with the pure spiritual energy of bliss, the Hadini Shakti. Now, crucially, just seeing these external symptoms isn't enough to confirm genuine bhava. They could potentially be imitated or arise from mere sentimentality. So the tradition provides a key internal test, a spiritual indicator, to verify the authenticity of the bhava.
And what is that essential test?
It's vairagya, which means detachment or disinterest, specifically towards material sense objects and pleasures. Now, vairagya is also a key concept in yoga, where it's often cultivated through effort. But here, in the context of bhava, this vairagya arises spontaneously. It's not forced. As genuine spiritual taste, ruchi, awakens in the heart due to bhava, the person naturally, automatically, loses their appetite for lower material tastes. They spontaneously lose attraction to things like excessive eating, intoxication, gambling, illicit sex, mundane gossip, etc. So if someone is exhibiting all the external sattvika bhavas, crying, shaking, fainting in ecstasy, but simultaneously they are still fiercely attached to and pursuing gross sense gratification, then the authenticity of their bhava is considered highly suspect. Genuine bhava must be accompanied by the spontaneous vairagya.
That's a very practical check. So bhava is the dawn. What about the full sunrise? What is prema?
Prema is the pinnacle. It's the fully matured, ripened fruit of bhakti. It's pure, unalloyed love of God. And this love is described as being ever increasing, it's non-static, it's constantly finding new ways to express itself. It's so profoundly satisfying, so nectarine, that the texts claim even souls who have already achieved liberation, moksha, might become attracted to prema and willingly give up their static perfection just to taste the dynamic sweetness of this loving relationship.
That's incredible, giving up liberation for love. But you mentioned earlier, because bhava has these very powerful, very visible external symptoms, the crying, the goosebumps, the ecstatic dancing, this creates a potential problem, doesn't it? The problem of semblance. Inexperienced people, or maybe even the person themselves, can be fooled into thinking they or someone else has achieved genuine bhava or even prema when the underlying motivation isn't actually pure.
Exactly. This is a significant point of caution in the texts. We see this phenomenon, perhaps. Someone might display very convincing outward signs of spiritual ecstasy. Maybe they cry rivers of tears during kirtan. But internally, if you could see their heart's motivation, they might still be operating with a subtle or even not so subtle transactional motive. Maybe deep down, they're really hoping for moksha, liberation from suffering. Or maybe they're hoping for material benefits like followers or wealth or reputation that might come from appearing spiritually advanced. The wise, experienced devotee learns to look beyond the external symptoms and tries to discern the underlying motivation. If the person is seeking anything other than pleasing kin, simply for kin's sake, then what they are experiencing or displaying is considered only a semblance, a reflection, or a shadow of true love, not the real thing.
Okay, Rupa Goswami actually details two specific categories of these semblances, right, to help practitioners identify them. Let's look at the first one, the reflection of love, prema-masa pratibimba.
Yes, the reflection of love, pratibimba prema-pasa, is described as being quite transient and fickle. It might remove sorrow or bring a feeling of peace just for a moment, but it doesn't last. And interestingly, it can be observed even in people who have no real spiritual conviction, no deep theological understanding, or no steady practice. It might arise simply due to some accidental, temporary association with holy things, like spending a day visiting a holy place like Mandavana and feeling emotionally moved by the atmosphere, or briefly associating with a pure devotee and feeling uplifted. But because there's no real substance or commitment behind it, it's just a fleeting emotional reflection, easily lost as soon as the person returns to their normal, mundane environment and routine. It doesn't transform the heart.
Okay, like a reflection in a mirror looks real but has no substance.
Yeah.
And the second category, the shadow of love, chaya pramopasa, sounds potentially more deceptive, more easily mistaken for the real thing.
It is, because the shadow of love, chapramapasa, is often accompanied by those genuine-looking sattvika bhava symptoms. The person may cry real tears, they may experience goosebumps, their voice may falter, they may feel a genuine wave of spiritual emotion. So externally, it can look very much like authentic bhava. But the crucial flaw, again, lies in the hidden motivation. The person experiencing this shadow is typically motivated by a subtle desire for either moksha, liberation, merging into Brahman, ending suffering, or bhakti, material enjoyment, power, mystic abilities, heavenly pleasures. They are essentially trying to leverage the process of devotion, maybe even unconsciously, to fulfill a fundamentally self-centered goal. They might be praying, "Oh Lord, I love you so much, please grant me liberation," or "Please grant me mystic powers." Since their ultimate goal is still focused on their own state, liberation, or their own enjoyment, bhakti, rather than purely on the selfless service and pleasure of the Lord, it's classified as only a shadow of prema, not the substance.
This just keeps bringing us back, again and again, to that fundamental litmus test for this entire theology, doesn't it? It all hinges on the internal motivation. Is it entirely selfless, purely aimed at pleasing the divine for the divine's own sake? Or is there any internal transaction going on, any subtle demand for personal benefit, even a seemingly lofty spiritual one like liberation?
That internal motivation, that purity of intent, really is the hinge upon which the entire practice and its ultimate result turns. It's the difference between brass and gold.
Okay, so since prema and even authentic bhava are ultimately gifts, not things we can just manufacture through willpower, most aspirants need to engage in dedicated, structured spiritual practice. This is sadhana. And the tradition seems to outline two main streams or moods of practice depending on the aspirant's internal development and attraction. We have the regulated path and the spontaneous path.
That's right. We absolutely must begin with Vaidhi Bhakti. This is the formal, regulated path of devotion. The word Vaidhi comes from Vidhi, meaning rules or injunctions found in the scriptures, shastra. So Vaidhi Bhakti is also known as the Marya Marga, the path of etiquette, decorum, and adherence to scriptural rules and regulations. This is typically the kind of practice you see emphasized in temple worship, in ashram life, following prescribed routines and rituals.
And this regulated path, Vaidhi, it seems like it's the necessary starting point for almost everyone, isn't it? You can't just skip it.
It's considered absolutely essential, yes. Unless someone has received extraordinary spontaneous grace from birth or through a pure devotee, Vaidhi Bhakti is the foundation. Its primary purpose is purification, deep purification of the heart and mind. Following the rules and regulations systematically helps to destroy accumulated negative reactions, papa or adma. It eliminates the deep-seated seeds of sinful desires, klishas or bujas, and it gradually bestows auspiciousness, magala, upon the practitioner. Through steady adherence to these disciplines, the mind becomes clearer, the senses come under control, the person develops saintly qualities, and this naturally leads to inner peace, happiness, and often they become attractive and dear to others.
So this systematic purification, this cleansing of the heart through regulated practice, it's not optional. You can't just bypass it and jump straight to the advanced stages of emotional ecstasy.
Precisely. You really can't leapfrog over Vaidhi Bhakti. It's the indispensable method, the sadhana, the structured practice by which the higher stages of devotion, like bhava and prema, are eventually achieved by most people. The rules and regulations provide the necessary structure, the container, that holds the aspirant steady and focused, gradually purifying their consciousness until the heart naturally develops the spontaneous attachment required for the next stage.
Okay, so Vaidhi is the foundation, the school of rules. Once the mind is significantly purified through that process and the heart genuinely starts to feel a natural spontaneous attraction towards Ka, then the devotee might become eligible to transition or evolve into the second stream, Raganuga Bhakti.
Yes. Raganuga Bhakti is the path of spontaneous devotion. It's based on raga, which means deep, intense, inherent attachment or affection. This stage of practice is no longer primarily motivated by following scriptural rules or injunctions out of a sense of duty or obligation. Instead, the devotion flows naturally, spontaneously, almost impulsively, simply because the heart is now intensely and constantly attracted to the beloved, to Kint. The mood here is called ragatmika, a state where the soul atma is completely permeated atmika by this intense loving attachment.
And the devotee practicing Raganuga, they don't just invent this spontaneous flow from scratch, do they? The name itself, Raganuga, implies following something.
Exactly. Raganuga literally means following anuga in the wake of the raga. Whose raga? The raga of the ragatmikas. The ragatmikas are the eternally perfected devotees who reside in Kittur's own abode, particularly in Vrindavana, his most intimate setting. These residents, like the cowherd boys, the elder gopas and gopis, Kautana's parents, Nanda and Yashoda, and supremely the young gopis headed by Ravinas, are the embodiments, the eternal models of perfect, spontaneous, selfless love. So the Raganuga devotee, the practitioner on earth, doesn't try to imitate their external actions perfectly, but rather tries to cultivate and follow anuga, the specific internal mood, bhava, of one of these eternal associates, desiring to eventually serve Kantna alongside them in the spiritual world.
That's fascinating. So you align yourself internally with an eternal mood. But there's a really crucial condition for this pure, spontaneous, intimate love to flourish, isn't there? It requires the devotee to have, paradoxically, a complete absence of awareness regarding Kina's supreme power, majesty, and godhood. If the devotee becomes conscious, oh, I'm playing with the supreme lord of all universes, then the relationship immediately shifts back towards awe and reverence, towards formality, which is the characteristic of Vaidhi Bhakti, not Raganuga.
That is the defining paradox and the absolute prerequisite for the most intimate forms of divine love in this tradition. To engage in truly spontaneous, informal, deeply personal relationships with Kata as a friend, as a parent, or as a lover, the devotee must be entirely free from the consciousness of his overwhelming omnipotence and majesty, Aishwarya. And this covering of the devotee's awareness is achieved through the agency of another aspect of God's internal energy called Yoga Maya.
Yoga Maya. Okay, so it's related to the Maya Shakti we discussed earlier, the external energy that causes illusion in the material world.
It's related in name, but its function is precisely the opposite. While the external Mahamaya covers the soul's consciousness and makes it forget kin, the internal Yoga Maya specifically covers Kanta's majesty from the eyes of his intimate devotees, precisely to facilitate and deepen their loving relationship with him. It enhances intimacy by removing the obstacle of awe and reverence.
Can you give us a concrete example of how Yoga Maya works to achieve this?
Absolutely. Think about the famous stories of Mother Yashoda, Kinuchi's foster mother in Vrindavana. Her entire relationship with Khan is based on Vatsalya Rasa, pure maternal love. Her mood is constantly one of protection, nurturing, and sometimes worry and discipline towards her mischievous little boy. There's a famous pastime where the child can't eat dirt. Yashoda becomes concerned and asks him to open his mouth. When he does, she sees the entire universe displayed within his tiny mouth, all the planets, stars, galaxies, time itself.
Whoa! Okay, that should definitely trigger an awareness of his godhood.
You would think so. For a moment, perhaps she's bewildered. But almost immediately, Yogamaya acts. She thinks, oh, this must be some strange illusion, or maybe it's some magic my little boy has accidentally performed. Her overwhelming maternal love, empowered by Yogamaya, instantly overrides the perception of his divinity, allowing her to simply pull him close, wipe his mouth, and continue treating him as her dependent child who needs her care. If she constantly perceived him as the Supreme Lord, the spontaneous, informal intimacy of their mother-son relationship would be impossible. She couldn't scold him or worry about him if she knew he was the source of everything.
That perfectly illustrates how Yoga Maya actively works to maintain the specific conditions necessary for these intimate, loving moods. So the Raganuga devotee, then, cultivates a desire to follow one of these primary emotional relationships, these rasas or bhavas, which are eternally modeled by the Ragadmika associates in Vanadava.
Yes, Rupa Goswami and later theologians meticulously analyze and define these primary relational moods or transcendental mellows, rasas, that a devotee can aspire to cultivate in Raganuga Bhakti. 1. Dasya Rasa, servitude. This is the mood of being an eternal servant. The relationship is characterized by deep respect, loyalty, carrying out the master's orders. Think of Hanuman's devotion to Lord Rama, profound service and reverence, but still within the context of Vaikunta's formality, generally. In Vadavana Dasya, it's more informal service, like serving Kent as his personal attendant. Sakya Rasa, friendship. Here, the relationship is one of complete equality, familiarity, and freedom from any formality or awe. Kent's coward friends in Vadavana treat him as one of them. They wrestle with him, climb on his shoulders, share their food with him from mouth to mouth, tease him, give him advice. There's absolutely no sense that he is God. 3. Vatsalya Rasa, parental affection. This is the mood of being a parent or elder, feeling protective, nurturing, and caring towards kin.
The devotee feels, in a sense, superior in their capacity to care for and protect the Lord, who appears as a dependent child or youth. Mother Yashoda and Nanda Maharaja are the prime examples. They worry about him, feed him, dress him, and are convinced he needs their constant care. 4. Madhurya Rasa, amorous or conjugal love. This is considered the highest, most intimate, and most complex of all the rasas. It's exemplified supremely by the relationship between Kincha and the young cowherd damsels of Vrindavana, the gopis, headed by Srimati Radharash. This mood includes all the elements of the previous rasas, service, friendship, care, but adds the dimension of romantic love, characterized by intense longing, the pain of separation, vipralambha, and the unparalleled bliss of union, samvoga, all aimed solely at Kincha's pleasure. This is often considered the ultimate peak of devotional perfection accessible to the soul.
It's truly a complete spectrum of potential relationships, isn't it? It ensures that virtually every type of loving personality structure can find its unique, corresponding way to connect intimately with the divine once the stage of purification is passed. Now, before we move fully into the practical steps of sadhana, there was that intriguing point you mentioned earlier, the case of demonic absorption. How does that fit in?
Yes, it's a fascinating theological point used to illustrate the sheer power of absorption in the divine, regardless of the quality of that absorption. The texts discuss figures like Kinkasa, Kaita's demonic uncle, Shishupala, Dantavakra, and others who were Kaita's avowed enemies. They thought of Kaita constantly, obsessively, but their thoughts were saturated with hatred, fear, and envy.
But because their minds were utterly, completely absorbed in thinking about Kanta, even though negatively, they still achieved some kind of purification or liberation.
Precisely. The principle is that the absolute truth, K is like fire. Whether you touch fire lovingly or angrily, it will burn you, meaning it will purify. So, because their minds were constantly fixed on the form and activities of the Supreme Pure, All their accumulated sinful reactions, papa, were automatically destroyed. However, and this is the crucial distinction, their ultimate destination was determined by their motivation, by the quality of their consciousness. Because they related to Kona through hatred and fear, not love and service, they did not attain the spiritual world of loving relationships, Vaikuta or Goloka Vrindavana. Instead, upon being killed by Kona, they attained Sayuja Mukti. They merged into the impersonal Brahman effulgence, the very same goal often sought by the impersonalistic Jnanis. They were liberated from the cycle of birth and death and material suffering, yes, but they completely forfeited the eternal, dynamic, blissful relationship of loving service.
So it powerfully underlines the point again. The method of absorption matters, but the internal motivation, the rasa or lack thereof, determines the final spiritual destination. Absorption in God destroys sin, but only loving absorption leads to love.
Exactly. It clarifies why Bhakti, defined by selfless, loving service, is considered the supreme path leading to the supreme destination. Hashtag the 64 processes of practice, sadhana bhakti.
Okay, let's pivot back now firmly to the path for the aspiring devotee, the one who wants to cultivate that loving absorption. We need to look at the practical steps involved in Vaidhi Bhakti, the regulated practice designed to purify the heart and make one eligible for bhava. This brings us to that detailed, systematic list found in texts like Rupa Goswami's Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, the 64 processes or angas of practice, known collectively as sadhana bhakti.
Yes, this list of 64 items is really an absolute masterclass in practical spirituality. It's incredibly comprehensive. And as we touched upon earlier, its fundamental purpose is the exact opposite of nirodha, cessation. It's a methodology designed for the complete and positive absorption of the mind and senses in God, in Kanta. These 64 practices cover virtually every aspect of life. They can be performed individually as distinct acts, or many of them can be combined in daily life, ensuring that ideally, every moment, every thought, every action of the devotee becomes consciously engaged in relationship with and service to the divine.
And you mentioned earlier there's a crucial precondition, an underlying mood, that needs to permeate all these practices for them to be effective in cultivating pure bhakti, that mood of profound humility.
Yes, that is foundational. The correct internal mood, the proper disposition of the heart, is considered paramount. Without it, even faithfully performing the external practices might not yield the desired result of prema. The practitioner is encouraged to cultivate a mood of profound humility, genuinely seeing oneself as the insignificant servant of the Lord. There are famous prayers expressing this, like feeling more lowly than a blade of grass, or like a speck of dust eternally attached to your lotus feet. This extreme, sincere humility acts as a powerful antidote and safeguard against that subtle enemy we discussed, buddhi ahakara, intellectual or spiritual pride. It ensures that as the devotee makes spiritual progress, they don't become proud, which would immediately stall their advancement in pure love.
That makes sense. Humility keeps the channel open for grace. Now, looking at the list of 64, the very first steps seem to focus entirely on establishing the connection with a spiritual guide, the guru.
Absolutely. The initial stage of the path, for almost everyone, depends entirely on receiving guidance and empowerment from a qualified spiritual teacher. So the first 3 items on the list of 64 practices are:
Taking shelter at the feet of a bona fide guru, accepting a spiritual master,
receiving initiation from that guru, which usually involves receiving a specific mantra and formal entrance into the lineage, sampradaya,
serving the guru with faith, trust, and obedience, understanding the guru to be the representative of Kolskan.
This connection is considered absolutely vital because the guru, who ideally possesses or is firmly situated in bhakti themselves, acts as the transparent medium, the conduit, through which spiritual knowledge, jnana, and, more importantly, divine grace, can flow into the life of the aspiring disciple. We're generally advised not to try and evaluate potential gurus based solely on our own limited material intellect, but rather to pray sincerely for guidance and focus on developing our own sincerity and trust. Providence, it's said, will then arrange the connection.
Okay, so establishing the guru connection is step 1, 2, and 3. Now, within the remaining 61 practices, Rupa Goswami seems to give special emphasis to a specific group of 5. He highlights them, saying they possess extraordinary and incomprehensible power. He even states that engaging with even a small amount of these 5 practices can very quickly produce bhava, the dawn of pure love. Why are these 5 singled out?
Yes, he definitely elevates these five. He lists all 64, but then he repeats these five and dedicates specific verses to extolling their unique potency. The understanding is that these five particular practices provide an especially direct, immediate, and intensive means of connecting with the divine reality. They seem to act as powerful conduits for grace, often capable of purifying the heart and awakening bhava more rapidly than some of the other practices, potentially bypassing some of the longer, more gradual stages of purification. They are considered so intrinsically powerful, so saturated with Kunta's presence, that they can accelerate the entire spiritual process significantly.
All right, given their importance, let's dedicate some focused time to unpacking these extraordinary 5 practices. What are they, and what makes each one so potent?
Okay, the first of the super potent five is 1. Worship of the deity, arcana. This involves the practice of murtaseva, serving the worshipful form or image of the Lord, the deity. It's crucial to understand that from the Bhakti perspective, the deity is not seen as an idol, not just a symbolic statue made of stone or metal. Rather, the deity, when installed properly by authorized devotees according to scriptural procedures, is considered a direct, accessible manifestation of the Lord himself, who kindly agrees to appear in that form to accept the devotee's loving service. The deity form can actually be made of various materials listed in Scripture: stone, metal, wood, clay, paint, sand, jewels, or even significantly constituted purely within the mind, manas, or formed from subtle mental impressions, satskara. This shows it's ultimately about the internal reality of relationship.
Okay, but what makes this arcana so powerful? On the surface, it could seem like ritualism, which we earlier heard could be an obstruction if not done with the right mood. How is this different?
The difference lies entirely in the consciousness and the intention. This is not meant to be rote, mechanical ritual performed for material gain or even just for purification. It's conceived as intimate, personal, daily service, seva, offered directly to King who is personally present. The devotee interacts with the deity as a person. They wake the deity in the morning, offer him bathing, dress him in beautiful clothes and ornaments, offer him carefully prepared food, bhoga, which becomes sanctified, prasadam, offer fragrant incense and flowers, sing for him, read to him, and finally put the deity to rest at night. This regular daily cycle of intimate personal activities allows the devotee to constantly engage their senses, sight, touch, smell, taste, hearing, and their mind in a direct relational way with the Lord. It powerfully reinforces the understanding that God is a person who can be served, loved, and related with intimately. This sustained, loving engagement is considered an extraordinarily effective way to purify the heart and attract bhava.
That makes the distinction clear. It's relationship, not just ritual.
Okay.
The second of the powerful 5. 2. Listening. We heard earlier that this is perhaps the primary practice, the one that ignites everything else.
Yes, Shravana is often considered the very starting point. Bhakti essentially begins with hearing. Shravana means specifically hearing about the transcendental names, forms, qualities, pastimes, and teachings of the Lord, especially as narrated in sacred texts like the Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavata Purat, and the Bhagavad Gita. The scriptures themselves state that these narrations are non-different from Kana. They are concentrated spiritual reality, pure nectar for the soul. The mind, which is currently contaminated by hearing so much mundane, materialistic sound vibration, becomes purified simply by receptive, faithful listening to this divine sound. Just by allowing the ear, the gateway to consciousness, to receive these transcendental messages from authorized sources, like the guru or saintly persons, the heart begins to be cleansed. In a world saturated with noise and distraction, consciously choosing to dedicate the faculty of hearing to the absolute truth is seen as profoundly transformative.
Hearing is a purifying act. Got it. Third of the 5. 3. Singing the names Kirtan Japa. This seems to leverage the power of sound itself, but in an active way.
Exactly. If Shravans is receptive hearing, Kirtan and Japa involve the active use of the voice to vibrate the holy names of God. These are seen as the principal practices for this current age, the Kali Yuga. There are 2 main modes. Kirtan usually refers to the loud, often congregational singing or chanting of the Lord's names, like the Hare Kunt, Mahamantra, his qualities or his pastimes, often accompanied by musical instruments. It's a powerful, immersive public practice that creates a vibrant spiritual atmosphere. Japa, on the other hand, is the quiet, private, more meditative repetition or pronunciation of the holy name or mantra, usually using prayer beads, japamala, to keep count. Here, the sound resonates more internally, just for the devotee's own hearing. The core principle behind both is that the holy name of God is considered absolutely non-different from God himself. It is kanta in sound form. Therefore, the texts state emphatically that simply by chanting the holy name, sincerely and without offense, one immediately contacts the divine and destroys lifetimes of accumulated sinful reactions. It's presented as the most direct, accessible, and potent method of purification and connection available.
Wow, the name itself is the connection. Okay, fourth of the powerful five. 4. Association with devotees, sadhusaga. This sounds like the social dimension, the importance of community.
It's absolutely essential, yes. Sadhusaga means associating with sadhus, saintly persons, genuine devotees of the Lord, who are seriously practicing bhakti. The practice involves actively seeking out the company of devotees who are ideally more advanced on the path, who share a similar devotional temperament, rasa, and who can provide inspiration, guidance, and protection. The source texts use powerful analogies. Association with pure devotees, bhaktas, is compared to how a clear crystal takes on the color of objects placed near it. Their purity, their faith, their love for Kon, these qualities literally rub off on you through proximity and interaction. Another analogy is scent. If you spend time in a room filled with fragrant flowers, your clothes will naturally pick up the scent. The scriptures stress this point dramatically, stating that even a moment's association, lava matra sadhusoga, with a pure devotee is considered more valuable and potent for spiritual advancement than achieving heavenly planets or even attaining impersonal liberation.
There it is again, that a return to the core philosophical claim. Genuine relationship, even relationship with the Lord's devotees, is considered superior to solitary self-realization.
Precisely. Sadhusaga provides the vital, nurturing environment needed to protect the tender creeper of devotion, bhaktilata, in the heart, especially in the early stages when it's very fragile and easily choked by materialism or bad association, asatsoga. It provides strength, encouragement, and context for the whole practice until one's own devotion matures into stable bhava and prema.
Makes perfect sense. Community is key. And the fifth and final of these super potent practices. 5. Living in holy places, Mathuavasa, specifically mentioning places like Vandavana or Mathura. This brings in the geography of grace.
Yes, Mathuravasa, or residing in the Dhamma. The Dhamma refers to the sacred land, the holy abode, where Kant performed his earthly pastimes, lila, with Mathura and especially Vandavana being considered the most sacred. Living in these holy places is considered incredibly potent because the sacred environment itself is understood to be non-different from the spiritual world, a direct manifestation of Kancha's Farupa Shakti on earth. The very dust of Davana is considered purifying. The atmosphere, the rivers like the Yamuna, the hills like Govardhana, the trees, the animals, and crucially, the constant presence of other devotees and saints living there, all of it automatically triggers remembrance, smarankam, of Kant and his pastimes. The mind becomes naturally immersed in Kant consciousness simply by residing in that supercharged spiritual environment. The texts claim that devotion to Hari is automatically generated just by faithfully living in the Dhamma, as the atmosphere itself is saturated with the particles of Kancha's love and bliss, the Hadini Sakti. It's like plugging directly into a spiritual power source.
Okay, those 5 deity worship, hearing scripture, chanting the name, associating with devotees, and living in the Holy Land are clearly highlighted as exceptionally powerful accelerators on the path. Now, moving beyond those specific 5, the remaining 59 practices on the list seem designed to provide comprehensive coverage, ensuring every aspect of life can potentially be spiritualized. What are some of the other key practices from the list that we should probably highlight to complete this architectural blueprint of sadhana?
Yes, the list is very thorough. While those 5 are often emphasized for their potency, several others are fundamental to the overall structure and goal. Perhaps the most central underlying goal of all the practices is remembering the Lord, smarantam. Ultimately, all the external activities, the hearing, chanting, worshiping, serving, are meant to facilitate this constant internal state of remembrance. Uninterrupted mental connection with the Pthanta's names, forms, qualities, and pastimes is the real objective. The practice involves consciously cultivating this remembrance throughout the day. The texts state that when a person constantly remembers God, they become purified, illuminated, and become a vessel for attracting all auspiciousness, beauty, and happiness. Smartam is the inner thread that should ideally connect all the external beads of practice.
So constant inner remembrance is the goal. Then there's also a corresponding external practice that seems crucial. Self-surrender, Atmanivedana. This sounds like giving up one's own agency completely to the divine.
Exactly. Atmanivedana means full self-entrustment. completely surrendering oneself, one's body, mind, words, possessions, desires, everything to the Lord's will and protection. It's about giving up the false notion that I am the controller or I am the proprietor, and sincerely accepting one's position as the eternal servant, fully dependent on God's grace. When a mortal being fully entrusts themselves to Quinta in this way, the texts say that Quinta accepts them fully, declaring, they become part of my design. At that point, the person enters into a state of fearlessness and immortality because they're no longer operating based on their own limited, fallible, individual ego, ahacara, but are aligning themselves completely with the perfect, infallible divine will. It's a key element of taking shelter.
That's profound. We also noted earlier a specific comparison made regarding physical acts of devotion, namely prostrating, tanthaprana, versus the ancient, highly prestigious Vedic ritual of the horse sacrifice, Ashwamedha Yajna. This really highlights the philosophical shift from the path of karma, ritualistic works, to bhakti devotion.
Yes, that comparison is very telling. The Puras state that performing even one simple, humble prostration, falling flat like a stick, before the deity of kin or his pure devotee with genuine devotional feeling is considered spiritually superior to performing 10 elaborate and costly Vedic horse sacrifices. Why? Because the horse sacrifice, while exalted within the Karmakat section of the Vedas, is fundamentally a transactional ritual. Its goal is typically material piety, power, or attainment of heavenly realms, svarga. These results, however glorious, are ultimately temporary. One must eventually take birth again. Prostration performed with the mood of bhakti, however, expressing humility and surrender, directly pleases the Supreme Lord and contributes to the path of prema, which leads to liberation from the entire cycle of birth and death, samsara, and entry into the eternal relationship of loving service. So it yields an eternal result versus a temporary, albeit exalted material result. It shows the superiority of devotional motive over ritualistic action.
That clearly illustrates the value system. Finally, another important practice listed is reading scripture, Shastra Atyana, or Paiha. And the emphasis seems to be that this isn't just about acquiring information. It's considered an act of service in itself.
Precisely. Studying the sacred texts that specifically focus on devotion to Quinta, like the Bhagavatam or Gita, is itself considered a form of yajna, or sacrifice specifically, a janayanya, a sacrifice performed through knowledge. The scriptures themselves, especially those dealing directly with bhakti, are considered to be literary incarnations or manifestations of God's presence, Shabda Brahman or Shastravatara. Therefore, respectfully reading or hearing these texts is seen as directly associating with and serving the Lord who is present within those words. Even if the person doesn't immediately experience ecstatic feelings while reading, the very act of absorbing the mind in these transcendental narratives and teachings is inherently purifying, gradually cleansing the heart and nourishing the seed of devotion, simply because one is contacting the divine presence contained within the sacred sound of the scripture.
Wow. Taken together, this list of 64 practices really provides an incredibly detailed and systematic approach. It ensures that potentially every facet of a devotee's life, from their internal thoughts and external actions, from reading and chanting to eating, sleeping, working, traveling, interacting with others, right down to their intimate worship and overall mental disposition, can be consciously structured around and dedicated to the single purpose of developing selfless, loving service to the divine.
It truly is an architectural blueprint for cultivating divine love. It's designed methodically to help the practitioner systematically dismantle the false ego, ahacara, purify the heart and senses of material contamination, establish a relationship with the divine through various modes of service, and ultimately become a fit receptacle for receiving the priceless gift of bhava and prema. And through it all, the core message remains unwavering. The only truly valid motivation, the only fuel that makes this engine run towards its ultimate destination is the pure, unselfish desire to serve and please Kina, completely free from any personal expectation, even the expectation of liberation itself.
And importantly, this framework, while detailed and requiring dedication, is considered universally accessible, isn't it? Unlike some ancient paths that had restrictions.
Absolutely. That's often highlighted as one of the great glories of the Bhakti path, especially as emphasized by Caitanya Mahaprabhu. Unlike certain complex Vedic rituals or intense Vedanta scholarship, which historically might have had restrictions based on caste, gender, or intellectual capacity, Bhakti, particularly the chanting of the holy name, Namasankirtana, is declared to be open and available to every single human being on the planet, regardless of their background, social status, education, or previous qualifications. The only real qualifications required are sincerity, shraddha, a willingness to hear, and a dedication to practice, especially chanting the holy name and associating with devotees. It's presented as being fundamentally a matter of the heart, accessible to all.
Well, that seems like a perfect place to draw things towards a conclusion for this incredibly detailed deep dive. We've really journeyed through the architecture of divine love, following the systematic process laid out by authorities like Rupa Goswami, based on the foundational scriptures.
Yes, and if we were to synthesize it all down to the final critical choice that these texts present, it really does seem to boil down to this fundamental divergence we explored early on. It's the choice between aiming for the blissful yet static self-realization of one's own spiritual identity, the Atman, which is often the goal of jhana and results in moksha, versus aspiring for the dynamic, ever-increasing, eternally unfolding relationship of loving service with the personal God, Atampa, which is the goal and the very substance of pure bhakti or prema. And this tradition unequivocally asserts that the relational path, characterized by selfless devotion and eternal service, represents the highest, most complete, and most blissful expression of spiritual existence.
And perhaps the final thought for you, listener, reflecting on all this, is that the path towards experiencing that divine love, according to these sources, is ultimately rooted not so much in achieving great intellectual complexity or high status, but rather in the consistent, radical practice of profound humility and continuously, sincerely taking shelter of the holy name, the sacred texts, and the association of those who are genuinely walking the path. It's presented as a path of transformation through relentless, loving service. Thank you so much for joining us and engaging with this systematic deep dive into these foundational sources of devotional thought. We really hope this comprehensive analysis provides a clear map, a useful framework for your own journey towards understanding the nature of prema.
And just as a final note, for anyone seeking more information regarding the comprehensive theological framework from the Religious Studies arm of Energy and Personal Excellence, LLC, as discussed today, please do contact Sachin J. Karnik. His email address is provided for you in the description box below.